Welcome to Live Well, Dream Big. I'm Suzanne Monroe, founder of the International Association of Wellness Professionals, where I've been teaching people how to live a life of wellness, tap into their passion, and go for their dreams for over 15 years. I believe living well and dreaming big starts with ourselves. This podcast will show you how to create a healthy, holistic life, empower your mindset, follow your dreams, and make a big impact. Let's dive in right now. Hello, Live Well, Dream Big community. Welcome back to another episode. I am so excited to be here today. I have a special guest with me, someone whose work that I've followed for many years, and she's an author with some amazing books out there. Maia Toll is here with me today. She's the award-winning author of the best-selling Wild Wisdom series, which has inspired readers worldwide to really explore their human nature through the magical lens of the natural world. And the seeds for this series were planted when she apprenticed with a traditional healer in Ireland, where she spent extensive time really studying the growing cycles of plants, the alchemy of medicine making, and the psychospiritual aspects of healing. Her latest endeavor is The Night School, explores the edges of the universe, the depths of the self, all through the lens of philosophy, divination, and astrology. I have my copy on pre-order. It's coming out, and I'm so excited. And Maia also owns an herb shop called Herbiary with locations in Asheville, Philadelphia, and even online. And she lives in Asheville, North Carolina, with her partner and two ridiculously spoiled dogs. I love that. Welcome, Maia.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Wait, first quick note on those dogs. What kind of dogs are they?
They're both herding dogs. One's a Belgian Shepherd and one is some kind of border collie cattle herding mutt.
That is so awesome. Oh, I love it. My dog was just here in my recording office and I unfortunately had to kick him out. I'm like, sorry, you can't be here, because you just never know when they're gonna speak up and they want to be on the show, right?
Yeah. Andrew has taken ours up to the ridge, so they're getting their hike for the day right now.
Oh, that's so cute. Well, first of all, congrats on everything you've done in the world. Congrats on all of your books and your latest book. We're going to be talking about that today. It's so exciting. Like I said, I have my copy pre-ordered. I'm very excited to hear a little bit, maybe a sneak preview into it. But so we're going to be talking about some of those gems. But I would love to kind of just start off first, like hearing a little bit more about your story. Everyone has a story that brings them to what they're doing today, and just a little bit about your journey, especially for those who are new to your work.
Yeah. So it's funny. The journey is always evolving and the work is always evolving. But I think for me, it started when I got sick in my 20s. And I had one of those illnesses the doctors didn't know what to do with. So I was living in New York City, and my doctor was probably more open-minded than most. And she said, there are different philosophies around medicine. She said the philosophies of Western medicine are not going to solve this problem, but another type of medicine might. And so she sent me off into the wilds of New York. This was in the 90s, to talk to homeopaths and traditional Chinese healers and Ayurvedic practitioners. It was eye-opening for me, because I'm the daughter of a lawyer and a family therapist. There was a professional community I grew up in that had a lot of doctors in it. And so I grew up thinking, you got sick, you went to the doctor. That's just what you did. I didn't have the sense that there was any other route to wellness other than typical Western, medical healing, or lack of healing, as I've come to think of it. So I got sick and I started exploring and started just really opening up to the possibilities that existed outside of the modalities that I grew up with. And over time, over many years, that eventually led me to go to Ireland for a year to study with an herbalist there. I came home, I continued studying herbalism and other modalities that kind of went hand in hand with it, like essential oils and things like that. And I worked as a clinical herbalist for 12 years. I was working with one of the hospitals in Pennsylvania, as well as some local practitioners, and dealing with some really difficult cases that people were not getting well, in the regular medical system. And they'd get sent over to me, and sometimes something different would happen. So that was, that was the beginning, but I would say that was the beginning of this specific path. But since I've been very young, I've read magical novels, fantasy fiction. I've always been curious about mysticism, studied philosophy in college. So, there were a couple different threads that got braided after I kind of reapproached this from the lens of healing my own body.
That's so interesting, right? It's like these two different paths. Like, who could have thought those two areas kind of converging? But now, like, seeing your work today, it's like, oh yeah, wow, that makes perfect sense.
Right. It's, it's funny because when I was working as a clinical herbalist, one of the things that I was really concerned about was appearing too woo-woo. Like, I'm working with medical doctors. I wanted to be able to find that middle place where they could relate to me and I could relate to them. And so I was incredibly careful. Like, when I first opened Herbiary, we didn't carry any decks, no tarot decks. That was a rule, because I wanted a medical professional to walk in and to be comfortable and to realize that there was scientific basis for the work I was doing and that it wasn't just, a flight of fancy. So I find it incredibly, ironic is the wrong word, but every once in a while, the universe says, you thought that was true. Gotcha. Because now, like, I have decks. How bizarre.
Yeah. Well, I remember you saying too, like in one of your books, like, okay, so you had this incredible journey as you describe. And I mean, how forward thinking of your doctor to say, hey, like, we can't really help you, but there might be someone who can. And then you end up in Ireland, and you were saying that, like, you were kind of like, okay, I'm going to keep my distance here and just sort of learn the medicine of plants, like the science side of it. You didn't want to get into, like, what you kind of said was the woo woo or the spiritual side, but then something happened there. Like, your intuitive brain took over, and like, what exactly happened? Sounds like there was a real shift.
Yeah. I don't know that there isn't exactly with things like this. I think that more than anything else, I watched my teacher over the course of a year, and I saw that when she tapped into something other than the book knowledge, other than, reciting the chemical constituents of the plants, like when she tapped into something different, that she got incredible results for her clients. And so, there was this permission in that, like, not only permission, but like, if you actually really want to be a good healer, you need to tap into something that is bigger than your very rational brain. And watching her do that over and over again. One case that I remember in particular, there was a guy who was in the Irish military, and he was young, I'd say maybe 24, 25. And he had been being bounced from doctor to doctor to doctor. He just had the most bizarre set of symptoms. And she started asking him about his deployments, like exactly where he had been and what the weather conditions were in each of these different places. And she, like, it was like watching a hound dog track something. It was like she had gotten like some whiff of something and she was just following it. And what it turned out, and this is, kind of what she pieced together through asking intuitive questions that then gave her like rational, logical answers, right? She figured out that he had picked up a type of fungus in one deployment. And he was at that point in like a desert setting. It wasn't activated. But when he then got sent to a very hot, humid deployment, the fungus activated. And she kind of tracked this and then was able to give him enough specific information to go back to his medical doctor and get specific tests. And she was right. And I think that there was like, that's one of many cases where I kind of just watched her following a path that wasn't obvious. And when I talked to her, she wasn't always sure what she was looking for. But she could kind of see like that thread is brighter. I'm yanking on that one. And, I watched this methodology, like it worked. it worked. And so I think that more than anything else, that was the ultimate permission. Like, if you want to be good at this, Maia, you need to engage your whole self.
I love that. And yet it's so interesting, right? Because I feel like things are so divided. It's like you have to make the path. You got to choose your path. Like, are you going to go that scientific route or are you going to go that spiritual route? Right. And I think there was one moment too where your teacher said something like, if doctors had to take all the medicines they prescribe before giving them to anybody, like they would probably be writing fewer prescriptions. And it sounded like this kind of became this guiding principle for you in a way, because traditional healers, like they know their medicine really deeply. They know the science, but they also have this other broader aspect that you're talking about, like this intuition and the spiritual piece too. And so like bringing these two worlds together, I feel like that's kind of what you've done with your work as well. And it's like, it makes me wonder, like, why is it so divided? Like, why aren't we bringing this together in more aspects? Are you finding like you're a lone ranger out there, or like, what are you finding?
I used to be a lone ranger out there, not so much anymore. The world is definitely shifting, but there actually is a concrete historical reason why things are so divided. Back when pharmaceutical drugs were being developed in the late 1800s, they had to create things that could be patented, right? So you can't patent a dandelion root. You have to somehow shift it, turn it into a formula, do something that is unique so that you can patent it. And after you spend all the time, energy, money doing that, then you need to get your money out of it. So the group of people that we often call the robber barons, Vanderbilt, Carnegie, all those late Victorian folks, it wasn't all of them. And I believe off the top of my head that it was Carnegie and Rockefeller, but I might be wrong. A couple of them got together and they paid a publicist to start talking down herbalism and homeopathy because they were competing forms of medicine. And they had all these new patent drugs that they had to sell. And so it was very deliberate, very intentional. It was a PR campaign that really created this rift between the older medicines and the newer. And it was, if you think about it, it was an easy thing to sell, right? Because like something like polio, there's no herbs you can take to reverse polio. So there are some things that Western medicine does that herbs literally can't do. And so for people who had been living with herbs, living with homeopathy, knew where the holes in the system were, they were like ready to jump on board with something new. So there's, it wasn't an accident, let's say. It was engineered.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting. So we had this like connection to herbs and this ancient wisdom. Then modern medicine came along, and then we kind of like forget about that in a way, though it's now, resurging, kind of coming back together. But I know you talk about, and you have obviously in the trilogy basically of your work, you talk about these three medicine kingdoms, which are really what these three books are about: the animal, vegetable, and mineral kingdoms. Right. Just talk a little bit more about those three worlds and just kind of like what your perspective is on these things, and just a little bit more about the three books in the trilogy themselves. Because there's the crystallery, I'm probably not even saying it perfectly right. The crystallery, the herbery, and the bestiary.
So the herbiary was the first book, and then the bestiary, and then the crystallary.
Okay.
And then the book that kind of ties them all together is the Wild Wisdom Companion.
Okay.
So that's a little quartet of books. And they were based on this idea of the ancient medicine kingdoms, which, like, this idea comes up all around the world. I think it's easiest to track through traditional Chinese medicine because traditional Chinese medicine is fairly intact in terms of, there are some ancient books that have been translated that are still out there, whereas some other medical traditions had like big breaks because of people's being conquered and wars and things like that. And if you think about these medicine kingdoms, we're very separated from the materials now, except for really the herbs. But if you just kind of break it down, the animal kingdom is any animal product. If you eat meat, you're getting animal medicine all the time, right? So at this point, we've kind of moved it into more of like a spiritual, what are the energies of this particular animal, and how can its energies inform my life energies, which is brilliant, and I love it. And it's really rooted in actual non-metaphoric use of the animals. If you look back at ancient Chinese medicine, they were using, I'm just making stuff up because I don't know all the things off the top of my head, but like if you needed to be strong like an elephant, then you had some powdered elephant tusk. I mean, that's why some of these animals have become endangered, because they've been hunted for their medicinal value. So in homeopathy, you have the principle of like cures like. And I think that that's what has happened with animal medicine throughout time. Like now we're looking more at, you want to be strong like an ox, you eat an ox because it gives you iron. And the iron is part of what adds to the strength. But before it could be parsed down to chemical components, there was still the knowledge that, for people who were mostly eating vegetables, if they ate a little meat, they got a little more energy. So right now we think of it as all spiritual and all metaphoric, but it used to be physical and concrete. Same thing with the stones. And we call them crystals now, but if you go back to traditional Chinese medicine, it's stone medicine. And that's where you got your minerals. You couldn't go get a capsule and get some iron or some calcium. So it was scraped from a stone, or a stone was put in water and allowed to, seep into the water, and then you drank it. And so the stones were a source of minerals. So these were physical medicines traditionally. They were not metaphoric medicines the way we're using them today. And I think that connection to the physicality of the world as medicine, like we've kind of lost that, that our medicine is like right out there in the world, in that green plant, in that animal, in that stone. We are one step removed, right? The medicine is now in a capsule, in a plastic jar, at Whole Foods, which is a very different thing than being able to walk out your door and understand that there is medicine there for you, that there is healing.
Yeah.
Right? Not metaphorically, but literally physically out there in the world.
Yeah, I know you talk about that too. Like you can walk into the pharmacy or Whole Foods or whatever, you can buy that bottle of vitamins and minerals, right? It's been like conveniently put into a little capsule, but that's just not how it always was. In fact, obviously people have consumed plants. I think even people in the holistic field, like think more about, okay, plants, herbs, like I get that for healing, but like talking about crystals in terms of stones and minerals for healing, like it's another level, like, okay, it's kind of like this, aha, like, okay, the plants were in the dirt with the stones, which gave the stone medicine to the plants. I think you talked about that. Yeah. And then how ancient healers said, okay, let's just skip that whole process and we'll just like go right to the stones directly. I found that kind of fascinating. I'm like, oh, wow. Because, I guess you just don't think of like stone medicine in that way. But they were like, okay, but you think of ingesting something seems different than, okay, I'm just going to take the stone and it has like properties just like holding on to it. Like, what's your take on that?
Well, I think you're moving from physical medicine to spiritual medicine, right? And so like for me right now, we're using all of this as spiritual medicine. And I would highly recommend using it as spiritual medicine because, a stone that has something you want might also have arsenic or some other thing you don't want. I mean, remember, these medicines weren't perfect. These medicines sometimes killed people. So there's a purification process that goes on in the lab, especially with minerals, because a lot of the minerals, if you even look at a stone, like if you look at a very clear crystal, you can be like, okay, this is 100% quartz. But a lot of things that you pick up are not 100% anything. There could be arsenic, there could be asbestos, there could be all kinds of things that you actually don't want to be ingesting in that stone. So at that point, using your kind of, patchwork quilt stone that has maybe some of what you want in it and some other stuff that you don't even know what it is in it, on the spiritual level is a much smarter way to go, right? So you're connecting with the energy of it. But when you're connecting with the energy of something, you're not connecting with it physically. You're connecting with it energetically. So we have to kind of keep in mind what each of these medicines can do. And I think that, as we get more skilled with working with these medicines, sometimes we can take something from the spiritual and make it physical. Sometimes we can take something from the physical and make it spiritual. But that's a hard transmutation. That's not an easy one. And I would even say for skilled practitioners, probably not one you can count on unless you've, are a Buddhist monk who's been living in the mountains for 30 years and like working on this all the time. If you're a normal person running to Starbucks and dropping the kids at school and everything else, and not like, spending all your time transmuting the physical into the spiritual and the spiritual into the physical, I wouldn't count on that in your moment of need, right? So let me give you a concrete example of this. I noticed a number of years ago that when I was starting to feel sick in my physical body, for real, like I'm getting a cold, I feel a little off, I would have this sense of raciness. I would have this sense that almost like I wanted to move too quickly. And I was laying in bed one night and I thought, okay, is it me that really wants to be racy right now? Because I feel kind of gross. Like, do I really want to be racing around? And I felt into my body and I was like, oh, that's not me. That's the virus. That's the virus in my body wanting to replicate, wanting to race through my body. And so just kind of applying, the basic mystical principles, I was like, well, what happens if energetically I refuse to align with that speedy energy? And I laid in bed and I felt the energy and I thought, okay, energy, you're not me. And then I felt for my own energy and it was much slower. And I just tuned into that. I'm like, this is me. This is me. This is me. That's not me. And allowed those two things to separate. And so that's a place where like a virus is a physical reality in your body. And I was doing energy work that was creating dissonance between myself and that virus. We're not the same. I'm separating us. And I have found that to be incredibly useful if I can do it at the beginning stages of a cold, that I can disengage from the energy of the virus. Have I ever been able to disengage from the energy of a broken bone? No. You know what I mean? Like that physical assault is too far along. The physical change is too great for me to do energy work I can do energy work to help the healing, but I can't do energy work to just make it go away. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. That's fascinating though. I think it's like so interesting because you're like, on one hand, like, okay, unless you're going to be the Buddhist monk, like you don't want to totally rely on this because we need both of these worlds or whatever. Yet I feel like through your books, you've created such a way for people to tap into that energy and to incorporate this into their lives. I'll give you an example. I have on my desk here today, lapis lazuli. For anyone who's on the video podcast, you can see this little stone or crystal or gem, whatever you want to call it. And it was so interesting how I came upon this because, of course, I had been kind of thinking about the word sovereignty a lot, and just like freedom has always been kind of like a personal principle of mine. But I've been like leaning more into sovereignty. I'm like, okay, it's not just about like freedom. It's always also about like tapping into that inner truth and like living your life from that place in order to create the freedom and choices that you want, this self-sovereignty. So I'm like playing around with this. And then I happened to land in your book and like pulled a little card card, and it was the lapis lazuli, all about sovereignty. And it felt like a medicine in a way, right? I was like, wow, because it was so aligned with like what was happening for me. And then it popped up, and now I'm just like carrying this little lapis lazuli around as a reminder.
Well, and but I think reminder is such a great word, because, you're carrying it and it's helping you to tune into the energy within you. You're creating an alignment with self-sovereignty through this constant reminder. It's not that the stone is gifting it to you, right? It's that the stone holds that energy and you're saying, I want to connect with that energy. And it's that reminder over and over again to keep stepping back into it, which creates a shift.
I love how you said that.
So yeah, the world is magic, and most of it is explainable. It's not like it's not Wizard of Oz magic. It is tapping into our own deepest psychological realms, our subconscious, the collective unconscious. I think sometimes we're so busy being singular that we forget that we're a member of the human race. We're part of a larger group. I always think about aspen trees and how above ground they look like they're one thing, but underneath they're one interconnected organism. So you might see 20 or 30 or 50 trees and think, individual trees, but what you're really looking at is one organism. And you can really see in the human race how things race around this, like the entirety of all of us, and anxiety takes hold, and you can like watch it like a wave moving across the country, because we're all at root tapped into the same thing. So the collective unconscious is those roots. It's all that stored, shared memory. And once we tap into it, all sorts of things can happen. You can pull up information that's not initially yours, not yours in this lifetime. But there it is, because it's part of the collective and you're tapped into that. So there are layers, and I think that most of modern society only acknowledges the physical layer and the emotional layer. Like we understand love and happiness and doting on our children and things like that. But those deeper layers we tend to not want to deal with.
Wow, that's an interesting perspective. And I love how you talked about the collective unconscious. And yeah, we can like tap into it, or if something's happening and we don't want to tap into it, right, we have to like align our energy as well. And kind of on another note, you talk a lot about rituals, and I love this idea of rituals, and you kind of bring them through your work and your teachings and your books. How do you see that fitting into, I guess, everything we're talking about today? Like, what exactly are rituals? How do they help us to live a great life, maybe, or whatever it is we're seeking?
So for me, rituals are instructions for your subconscious. And, for myself and for a lot of people I know, they often involve metaphor. So for instance, if there's someone who I can't deal with this human anymore. They are not someone who is helping me to create a good life. I can write their name on a piece of paper and put it in the freezer. Put them in deep freeze. I'm not dealing with them right now. That's a metaphor for my own subconscious, right? That's me telling me I am going to make an effort in the physical realm to remind myself how important this is to me. I'm going to make an effort in the physical realm to shift myself in the energetic realm, right? And so I think that a lot of ritual is based on these metaphors. And if you look back through religious history, it's there. Like the grounding for this is ancient. I grew up Jewish. On Saturday night, there's a service called Havdalah, which is to start the new week, because the Sabbath for Jewish people is Friday night into Saturday. So Saturday evening, you start the new week. And there'd be a spice blend that you'd pass around and waft under your nose for a sweet week. It's a metaphor, right? That we have we've taken something in the physical realm, sweet spices, we've ground them up, we've put them in the special little bowl, and now we're passing them around and smelling them. And it's setting that subconscious intention or moving it from subconscious to conscious that, yeah, I'm going to work toward having a really good week. That's something I can do. That's something I can put in motion myself. So for me, a lot of ritual is taking the time to get clear on what you really, really want, and then giving yourself instructions through physical movement activity, whether that's lighting a candle or putting your feet in water or whatever it is, so that it really sticks.
Okay, I'm feeling like light bulb going on right now, right? Because on one hand, you have the world of people, rituals, crystals, whatever they are, and then there's a sense of like, okay, like you're tapping into that, but this idea that you've really like explained here, this metaphor and the energetic component and these instructions to yourself, it's just like a whole new way of like taking it all in. I don't know. I think I'm going to have like ahas after this conversation. I can't even put it into words right now. So I so appreciate like your perspective on that. And I would love to keep talking about that, but I want to talk about the night school for the time that we have today, because it's your newest book, The Night School: Lessons in Moonlight, Magic, and the Mysteries of Being Human. What's it all about? Can you give us a little preview?
Yeah, so I can show you. I'm sitting in. There's so many skylights in this house; it's hard to escape them. But here's the book in its little shaft of sunlight, and this book has the principles that are behind the other series. So, the quartet of books is the 3 animal kingdoms. And then the 4th book is about time. It's about how to use these medicines over the course of a year, because the energy of the world around us shifts over the course of a year, right? I mean, and we witness that all the time. Summer is not the same as winter. Sometimes I think when we talk about energy shifts, we get so esoteric that we forget that we're actually talking about shifts. The sun is in a different place in the sky. There's a different amount of daylight. There's a different amount of heat. So, what happens when you add the aspect of time into your medicine cycle? And so that's the first quartet. But what I couldn't get into in those books was kind of the philosophies that were behind a lot of those thoughts. And so the night school is the founding principles, like where all this started. And it really reaches back thousands of years into old mystic traditions. What I found in my own like lifelong quest to figure out mysticism and magic and like, what is this other side of life, is that books tend to be written either so incredibly esoterically that like your head hurts after 3 sentences, like you just want to spit your teeth out and go to sleep. Or they're so saccharine and sugary, and they don't really give you any reasoning for what they're saying. They just kind of say, this is the way it is. Isn't that beautiful? Unicorn farts. And then you also want to spit your teeth out and go to sleep. So I was looking to write something that was a middle ground, that was easy reading, was fun reading, and also gave people the starting place to look deeper into certain mysteries and certain mystical traditions if they wanted to. I mean, obviously, you can't write thousands of years of mystical history in a book this thick. That's not going to work. But I could kind of say, okay, the door's over there. If you want, if you want to learn more, take the blue door. If you want to learn more about this, take the red door, and give people some clear instructions on where to go next. And so this book is diving more into that idea of the collective unconscious and where information comes from for divination, for astrology, and more importantly, to me, the inner work that you have to do on yourself and for yourself, so that when you're stepping into these other realms, you can see what's true and what's not. because it's really easy to be overwhelmed with information, with ideas, with other people's thoughts. And so for me, the most important thing that anyone can do on a mystical path, on a magical path, on a healing path is to get to know themselves deeply. So you have some idea who you are and what you believe in.
I love that. The inner wisdom piece is so huge, right? And this inner knowing, without it, it's, none of it matters. And I think there's a tendency for people to dive into all these different things, kind of looking for something outside themselves, where I love how you're bringing this all full circle. It's like, this is all available to you, but you've got to have that inner trust, that inner knowing to really make it, work for you and for it to be what you want it to be.
Yeah. And when I look out at what's going on in the world, I think about our interconnected humanness, and I look out at the world and I see conspiracy theories running rampant and people believing them. I mean, the things that people are believing are so incredibly absurd. And yet we are, as a species, as a race, so far off our center that we can't tell truth from not truth anymore. And so I think that this work is incredibly important for us as individuals, so that we can develop discernment, so that we have some idea, what is solid ground to stand on.
I was fascinated by the title, The Night School. And I had recently read, just like a few weeks before I saw your book, that, for thousands of years, people had like 2 sleep shifts, which I didn't realize. First, people would sleep for like a couple of hours. Then they would get up around midnight and they would it was called the watching. You probably know this. And, who knows what they would do? They would chop wood even, or like just hang out with their family or their neighbors, or that's when they did like their spiritual practices. And then they would go back to sleep for the second sleep. Yeah. It feels like there's something kind of magical about the night in itself. How did you come up with this title? And does it relate to this at all?
Well, it does relate to that. I mean, there's, again, it's a braided experience of getting to the title. My partner, Andrew, and I went to Peru, and we took a train to a little town called Ollantaytambo. And I might be saying that completely wrong, but that's the way it's been in my brain for years now. So there it is. And there wasn't much electric light. And so we were walking around at night, and I was so surprised by how different the world looked when you weren't lighting it with a flashlight, and when you weren't like bringing daylight into the night. And I noticed that he and I had a very different type of conversation than we had during the day. And I was fascinated by that, just how being in true dark shifted how we related to each other and how we spoke to each other and the types of things we talked about. So I was like, wow, there's something important that happens when we let ourselves truly experience the night. So there was that thread. And I've been kind of, talking about that for years and challenging people to go dark, to have a night without any electric lights and see what that's like. But the other piece of it, the kind of the school piece, I wasn't 100% sure where that came from. 2 years ago, I called Shannon, who is she's the person who knows my business better than I do. I call her my assistant, which feels very unfair and like a complete misnomer given what she does and who she is. So I called her one afternoon and I said, Shannon, the night school. And she said, well, okay, what is it? And I said, I don't know. But we started doing an email series and then some classes. And a woman who's been in our communities for a long time emailed me and she said, do you remember reading about the School of the Night ever? And I was like, the School of the Night? That sounds so familiar. And I backtracked it. And if you have read, I'm going to draw a blank on the name, Discovery of Witches. which was a novel out about probably 10, 12 years ago at this point. And it's a whole series. She talks about the school of the night, this group of philosophers who gathered in the 1500s to, at the time, they were discussing science because the church didn't want those things discussed. So they had to gather behind closed doors to have these discussions. So I think that filtered in as well on a subconscious level, just that the romanticism of the school of the night and the philosophers who were gathering to have these secret conversations that were considered to be dangerous. They were considered to be dangerous to modern society. And I think that we are unearthing some of these things that have been considered to be dangerous to modern society in the past. If you go on Instagram, just the number of people who are exploring things that fall under mysticism, witchiness, even the deeper explorations of yoga and things like that. These are things that for many years were mystical traditions that were kept secret. And as we move them into the mainstream, if we can do it well, and that's a big caveat, like if we can do it without turning it into candy corn, it has the potential to create big shifts in how each of us approaches our lives and the world around us. And that's dangerous.
It's so interesting you say that, because I think if we were like back in that time right now, this conversation would be considered like witchery or sorcery, just like
absolutely
exploring something, just herbs themselves. So now that you've landed on this word, witchery and witches, like what, just touching on that, because I know that you've talked about that in your work as well, like what happened there, like what, and what's happening now, you're saying it's shifting and these conversations are happening, but like people, are they still afraid of that word? And what's your take?
It is the word witch in particular has had so many meanings in our culture. Like, I don't know that it will ever be a word that won't cause reaction. There's too many Disney witches, and like it's at layers of culture that are sometimes dissonant from each other. And so depending on how someone learned about the word, I think that I have a hard time believing that we're going to get to a point where it's a word that doesn't cause a reaction. And in some ways, I don't care so much about the word itself. I care about the spirit of it. Like I hear a lot of witchy people talking about the burning times and how they have some kind of cultural memory or past life memory of the burning times. And I want to say, wake up. If we don't do this right now, the burning times are our future. You see Roe versus Wade being overturned and women having to look outside of the medical model to take care of themselves, to take control of their lives. And that's going to be considered evil, whether you call it witchcraft or not. I mean, we're already seeing that, right? Like there is a moral judgment being put on women's choices, a moral judgment, not even from one religion, but from one sect of one religion. So I think that there's always this tension, this push me, pull you between discovery and self-discovery and the forces that are looking to create a cohesive society by the rules that they would like us to be playing by. You know what I mean? And in different times and in different places, those rules change. But right now we have forces here in the United States that are trying to push us towards a particular expression of Christianity. And for those of us who fall outside of that, we're going to be considered outsiders, however you want to label that, whether you want to label it witches or whether you want to label it pagans, or, I mean, pagan used to just mean person of the countryside, someone who was outside of the kind of current culture of the cities. So we're seeing, on the one hand, like the rise of mysticism in everyday life and a more accessible form of magic and mysticism and healing, right? Because it's woven together. And on the other hand, we're seeing a block of people trying to make sure everyone thinks like them. And we could very well get into something that could be called the burning times, whether that's metaphoric or literal. So, we'll see. And this is why I feel like it's so important for people in holistic communities and spiritual communities to realize that we are like the aspen grove. We are connected. And a lot of this work in our kind of ego-driven culture has become very singular. It's become about me, my enlightenment, my journey, my path. And we forget about us. We forget about we, and we forget about our roots. So I am hoping that the night school can remind people as they're on their singular path to also be tapping into the collective that we are all a part of. There's my rant for the day.
and that was beautiful. And I'm like, okay, I think I have to stop there because it's just a beautiful ending. With that being said, is there anything else you wanted to touch on or share today that maybe I didn't ask you about, whether it's about the book or anything else?
No, this was a fabulous conversation. I'm so thrilled to have been able to do this with you.
This has been so magical in and of itself for me, and I'm so glad that you were here. I will put in the show notes how people can find you and find the book. Is there anywhere special you want them to go to just stay in touch with your journey? Like, what's the best place these days?
Yeah, the very best place is to go to my website, which is my name, myatoll.com, and sign up for the newsletter. I'm sure for those of you listening, you've heard other folks say, we can't control social media. So, if you follow me on Instagram or something, you might see a post like once every 2 years, depending on what Instagram feels like showing you at any given moment. So, if you really want to stay in touch and know what's going on, then signing up for my newsletter is the very best way to do that.
I couldn't agree more on the newsletter. So many great insights. So head over there. We'll put the link in the show notes. Thank you again, Maia, for being here. Thank you to everyone for listening in, and we will see you back here next time. Thank you for joining me for today's episode of Live Well, Dream Big. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation, and I want to invite you to take your next step toward living well and dreaming big by downloading the Live Well, Dream Big lifestyle book. It's the ultimate guide to becoming your best self and living life on your own terms. You can grab your complimentary copy by going to the link in the show notes or heading directly to iawpwellnesscoach.com/guide. That's iawpwellnesscoach.com/guide.